Baby, can we still shine? Tell me that we'll be fine. Always feel the love. Yeah. What if they alright? Still shine. Tell me that we'll be fine. Always feel the love. What if they alright? Baby, can we still shine? Tell me that we'll be fine. Always. Tell me that we'll be fine. Always.
Hello, I am Whitney Kobrin, and welcome to Love Kung Fu. Today, our question is, do you fight fairly? This is a huge topic when it comes to relationships of all kinds, especially our loving, intimate relationships. So let's just jump right in and start with, what are the biggest offenses of fighting unfairly? Well, the first one, which is probably going to be very obvious, is name calling and insulting. It is never okay to call your loved one a name. And this happens often when we're very frustrated, we're upset, we want to release some of our anger, and we direct it at our partner. So we call them a bad name, or we insult them and say, oh, you're just like your mom, you're just like whoever. And it's just not fair, and it doesn't lead to any sort of resolution. It just makes the fight worse, brings things deeper. This can also look like threatening. So when you're insulting someone, you can be threatening to leave, threatening whatever. And when we threaten, it's not conscious, it's not strategic, it's just out of anger. And I know from raising kids that empty threats really are a relationship killer, because if you say, oh, I'm going to leave if you do this many times, and then you don't, it doesn't have any meaning anymore. So the next big offense in fighting unfairly is the silent treatment. It's also known as stonewalling. This is where you don't talk to your partner for an extended period of time. So I know that sometimes we need to take a break. Sometimes we need to let go, cool off, step away from the conversation. That is totally healthy, totally okay. But when you linger in that space for hours, even days, even sometimes weeks or longer, it becomes very unfair, and it's not going to help the situation. It's only going to make it worse. When you don't talk about your feelings or the situation, and you're not able to communicate about it, it just feeds resentment or hatred towards each other. And we all know that is a relationship killer. So silent treatment is an unfair practice. We need to take our time to cool off if needed, but then come back, reconnect, and talk through the situation. The next big offense is blaming. Blaming can come in a few different flavors, if you will. One is that when we fight, we're just concerned about who's right. So it's, well, you did this, and that's why I'm right and you're wrong. And you've probably heard this old adage, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I'll tell you, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be both, and it doesn't mean that you have to give in to your partner all the time. It just means if you're fighting over who's right or who's to blame, then you're answering the wrong question. You're fighting about the wrong thing. Because once you get to a point where you decide, okay, fine, we've argued this out and decided that I'm right and you're to blame, well, there's still no resolution there. That's not a resolution. So blaming is a pointless endeavor in fighting with your loved one. Blaming can also involve fighting over these little details and nitpicking, and usually that will just go over the other person's head. Like if somebody, let's say partner was supposed to come home and bring milk and they forgot it. Well, are you going to fight over, well, I was at this store and then they didn't have it, and then I went to this one and then I just totally forgot? And it doesn't matter. The fact is, the person that you didn't get the milk for feels bad, and that's what you want to fight over, and that's what you want to communicate about is, I feel sad and disappointed that it wasn't done. And it doesn't matter what the reasons are. So when we find ourselves nitpicking over these little details and deciding who's right, who's wrong, who's to blame, who's not, it just doesn't lead us anywhere good. Another thing about blaming is when you point the finger at someone else and say, you are doing this or you did that to me, it will always trigger defensiveness. So think about it. If someone was blaming you for something, your knee-jerk reaction would be to defend yourself, to come back and say, no, I didn't do that, or no, I didn't mean it, or that wasn't my intention. And when we start to defend, then it becomes defend, offense, defense, offense, defense, and that's how we escalate fights, and leads to the next big offense, which is yelling. Yelling is not helpful in relationships. So I know that there are some people out there who speak loudly, they're boisterous, they yell all the time easily. I know when I spent a year living in Italy, before I understood the language, I thought everyone hated each other in the family. Turns out they were just loud people that yelled everything, including pass me the salt. So yelling is a tricky area, but what you really want to do is be able to communicate levelly. And you know this because you've all had, I know I have, we've all had those fights where we begin to yell. And usually what happens is one person gets upset and they start to yell, and then the other person wants to be heard over them, so they start to yell, and it just escalates like so. So I'm going to also give you some tips. So I'll give you some tips about how to avoid yelling. Number 5 of the big offenses is avoiding conflict. So part of fighting fairly is being able to talk about things, being able to bring things up. Because when we avoid conflict, resentment builds. And I love this photo because it's her trying to avoid conflict, but what she doesn't realize is she's actually escalating the conflict by not participating. And this is something that a lot of people do when they've been conditioned to become a people pleaser. Recovering people pleaser here, so I can relate. And I know that a lot of us have been conditioned to just be easygoing, easy to get along with. Some of us confuse feminine energy for people pleasing, which they're not the same thing, and they don't, you don't have to be a people pleaser to be feminine. But many of us will just go along to get along. And what happens though is you end up feeling unheard, unseen, unappreciated, and like you don't have a voice. And many people who end up in that type of role in the relationship, they blame their partner and say, oh, well, my partner is so demanding, so controlling, so unfair. But what they don't realize is that communication and relationships are a two-way street, and that you're also partly to blame because you're allowing this behavior. You're continuing this behavior. You're not learning how to speak up in healthy ways and get through conflict. And most of this stems from our childhood or our early years where we learned that fights are scary. So if this is you, if you're afraid of conflict, I feel for you. My heart goes out to you. It's understandable, but I also hope that you will learn better ways to communicate and take some steps to be able to bring up situations that are difficult and talk through them instead of just shutting down and avoiding all conflict. So there are the top 5 big offenders when it comes to fighting unfairly. So now I'm going to give you 5 tips on having healthy communication, having emotional maturity, and being able to work through things that come up in your relationship. So number 1 is speak for yourself. This is so important. And I teach all of my clients these scripts and tools where you focus on sentences that start with I, because you can only speak for yourself. You're only in your own body, in your own feelings, in your own thoughts. And that's where we need to start when we have a conflict that comes up. So you want to speak about what you feel and what you need. So you say, I feel sad when this happens, and what I need is whatever it is that you need. And that will help bring resolution to the situation. When you say, I need this, then you are able to tell your partner what it is that will make you happier. And your partner is then able to come back and take care of that. Be your hero. And if it's more complicated than that, at least you have an open dialogue and you're able to negotiate and compromise and work through those things. But what's not fair is to tell another person how they feel or how to feel, or make assumptions about what they're thinking or what their intentions are. So when we say, you always do this, you are sticking up for him and not me, and you, we're escalating the fight. We're yelling, we're blaming, we're not speaking on our own behalf. So when we can focus on just talking about myself, I feel this, I think this, then we're able to move through the conversation without triggering their defensiveness and then starting that back and forth battle. And that leads to the next tip, which is to be curious. So instead of telling your partner what they think and what they're doing and telling them all about them and saying, well, you're this and you're that and you always do this, instead of that, I want to challenge you to be curious. Ask questions. So if you think you know what's going on with them, instead of telling them what's going on with them, ask them. Say, are you feeling this? And let them explain and talk through it. Or you could say, were you thinking this when you did that? So instead of just assuming you want to be curious and ask questions. And when it comes to asking questions, you want to even ask the hard questions. So this is, this will come up sometimes, and it comes back to avoiding conflict. So instead of avoiding conflict, it's important that we're able to open up and ask the hard questions. And when we're curious, it also creates more opportunity for intimacy. So with these tips that I'm giving you about fighting fairly and having more emotional maturity, they're ways that we can turn conflict into an opportunity for more connection, more love, more respect, and more connection. So by being curious and finding out more about your partner, you can create a safe place for your partner to be vulnerable and honest. And when you accept them in their vulnerability, that's what creates intimacy in your relationship. The next tip is to be accountable for yourself and take responsibility for your own emotions. And I'm talking to both men and women here because we all have emotions. So if you get angry, take a minute to cool off. We live very stressful lives these days, and everyone's bound to get overwhelmed sometime. Everyone's bound to feel strong emotions, to get upset. But what we don't want to do is to make the other person responsible for that. And we see this all the time. I see it in all kinds of movies and TV when couples are fighting and they say, you make me crazy. Well, you need to take responsibility for your own emotions. You say, I feel crazy. I feel crazy when this happens. Because again, when we say you and we blame someone else for something, then we just trigger their defensiveness, and then the battle starts back and forth. So when we can take responsibility and accountability for our own emotions, we're able to continue the conversation towards a resolution instead of just getting so mad that we blow up and leave. Another thing is that with this stressful life that we live, a lot of times people don't take the time and effort to de-stress. You know, if you are one of those people that you know that you should be doing yoga, or you know that when you do meditate, you feel better, or when you were speaking with a coach or a therapist, things were going better. But then you get out of the habit and all of a sudden you're just work, stress. And then you bring it home and then you take it out on your partner. And that's just not fair. It's not fair for you to take your stress out on your partner. I see this a lot with single women too, where they are carrying the world on their shoulders. They're taking care of themselves, sometimes kids, the house, the bills, the work, and they're overwhelmed. And again, it's really important that you learn to de-stress. It's really important that you build time into your life to let go of pressure and stress, relax, have fun, dance, enjoy yourself, whatever it is that works for you. And it's important that if you don't know what de-stresses you, that you find out. Because if you carry all this tension and stress in you, it's going to show up in your love life. So with single women, a lot of times they bring it into their dating life, and then they just have a bad attitude towards all men. They're just frustrated, cranky, or they treat guys disrespectfully or in any way that they want and take advantage of them. And what I've seen is a lot of this attitude comes from just being too stressed out and not taking accountability for those emotions. Number 4 is to set boundaries. So if your partner is yelling at you, set a boundary. Tell them, I'm not okay staying here and being yelled at. Whatever it is that is not working for you, that is not okay, set a boundary. Let your partner know that's not okay. I'm not available for that. I'm not going to tolerate that. And if you do that again, here's what's going to happen. You know, if you say, for example, we need to fight fairly, and you're yelling right now, and I'm not going to stay here and be yelled at. So we need to either calm down or take a break, or I'm going to go in the other room. That's setting a boundary and setting a logical consequence for if that partner doesn't respect that boundary, what you'll do. And again, we don't want empty threats. We want something that you will actually do if they don't honor that boundary. So what does it mean when you can't speak up for your boundaries? So again, we have a lot of habits and patterns that make us afraid to speak up about a boundary because we think that it's going to escalate a fight, or we've had experience in the past where it has. So this means that you have a comfort zone. You know, we all do. We all have a comfort zone. But sometimes setting boundaries is outside of someone's comfort zone. And it just means that you're afraid. You know, it's something that scares you. So that's okay. It's understandable. But if you want a different result than what you're currently getting, then it's going to be imperative that you learn to step outside of your comfort zone, to do things that are going to feel uncomfortable. And I was just having a conversation with one of my love coaching clients about assertiveness, because she is one of those people that has always been a people pleaser, who has always felt that she doesn't have much of a voice, stemming all the way from childhood. And I told her, you don't have to think about being assertive as some big, huge goal that's outside of you. All you have to do is just speak your truth about how you feel in the moment. And that's not nearly as scary, I think, as, oh my gosh, I have to become an assertive person. I'm not an assertive person. I know these other people that are very assertive and maybe even borderline rude and demanding and controlling, and that's not me, and I don't want to be that. So if you're someone that's afraid of speaking up, of setting boundaries, then I encourage you just to think of one small step that you can do, which is, I feel whatever. So if someone's yelling at you, you don't necessarily have to come at them and say, you can't yell at me and I'm being assertive and I'm taking a stand. I mean, you can, you absolutely can. But you could just say, I feel scared right now, or I feel afraid right now, or I feel upset right now. And just start there. Just start there with something little, which can grow into you learning how to become more assertive. Because if you don't ever set boundaries, you're not going to be happy. You know, it may work for a little while where you go along to get along and you avoid conflict and try to keep the peace. But if you've been in this kind of relationship for any amount of time, you know that eventually the stuff hits the fan and all of a sudden you need your voice and you need to speak up and speak out against something. All right. So finally, number 5 of our healthy, conscious communication tips is work together. If you're in a relationship with someone, or even just dating and getting to know someone, keep in mind that you're both there for the same reason. You both want to be in a loving relationship. You want to feel supported and respected and loved by your partner. So you both have the same goal here. So it helps to think about that there's me, there's you, and there's the relationship. And sometimes when we get into a fight where it's about me versus you, it becomes a battle. But if you bring in this idea of the relationship, so instead of just fighting over what I think, what I need, what I said, what you think, what you need, you can bring in the idea that what the relationship needs. And that's when you guys can really come together and work together. So again, with the simple example of, let's say a partner was supposed to come home and bring milk. They couldn't find it or forgot, and the other person was upset when they got home. Well, instead of arguing over who was right, who was wrong, who did what, why it happened, which just won't get you anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's important to just say, well, what the relationship needs is for us to come back together to a loving, connected feeling. And so by speaking up and saying, I feel disappointed that it didn't happen. And then the other partner says, I'm sorry you feel disappointed. You know, I definitely didn't mean to disappoint you or hurt you. You know, I love you. Let's go out and get it together. You know, the ultimate goal with any fight or argument or conversation or conflict, the ultimate goal is to come back together in the end. You know, you're on the same team. You're not opposing sides of a war that need to conquer each other. And I know this is a big concept that can sometimes take quite a long time of self-discovery to uncover your own patterns and figure out ways to work around them and adopt these new healthy patterns. But I do also know that it's possible for anyone to improve their communication skills. So I hope this was helpful for you. Again, I'm Whitney Kobrin, and I am a love coach. I help women to love themselves, love their lives, and have lasting, happy, loving relationships. Right now, I have a course I'm offering called Conscious Communication for Women, How to Talk to Men to Get What You Want, where I cover all of these topics and much, much more in depth, in detail, with practices to help you learn to adopt these new, healthier patterns so that we can finally have the relationships that we want to have. So check out my website, whitneylovecoach.com, or just call or text me at the number on the screen. All right, thanks so much. And you can catch my show every Tuesday at 11 a.m.
Baby,